From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
A stunning legal lapse. Officials say a government attorney missed the deadline to appeal a lawsuit that could cost the state as much as $24 million. Now that attorney has resigned, and the Executive Office of Health and Human Services is once again in turmoil. How could it happen? This week on the first half of Newsmakers, Health and Human Services Secretary Eric Beane. Then, $250 million. That's how much General Treasurer Seth wants voters to borrow this fall to repair Rhode Island's crumbling schools. Can the state afford it? On the second half of Newsmakers, General Treasurer Seth
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program from WPRI.com, reporter Ted Nesi. Health and Human Services Secretary Eric Beane, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the big headline this week. The lawyer at the center of the colossal mistake, Gregory Haitian, has resigned, and he certainly seems to be the fall guy for the missed deadline to appeal a decision in a lawsuit by the state's nursing homes over reimbursement. $24 million in taxpayer money at stake. Was Greg Haitian truly the only one with his finger on the pulse here?
First, let me say that the news of this week does not accurately reflect the great work that's done by all of the employees at EOHHS. We have a team of people that are deeply committed to public service and work hard and do good work every day. As for this particular case, I won't dispute this was egregious misconduct, and it's simply unacceptable. The attorney missed the deadline in this case, didn't notify us about the appeal despite receiving notice about it, and in the course of the investigation, we learned that he had not been keeping up with the CLEs and was no longer a member of good standing with the Rhode Island Bar. So we took swift action to move forward with a termination hearing, and on the eve of that, he resigned. That type of conduct simply will not be tolerated in this administration.
But with all due respect, Secretary, how is it that you don't know about something as big as a $24 million lawsuit, and that's not top of mind for you?
Well, that's a good question, and frankly, I'm really upset that I hadn't been briefed on this case, and it's not because we don't have the structures in place to meet regularly with attorneys to hear about significant litigation matters. We've had meetings where we go over all litigation that has that's significant, and there are disclosures that our attorneys do to the Auditor General, where we're supposed to identify any case that has a potential impact of over $100,000. This hadn't been disclosed. Those are significant issues, and that's why the supervising attorney is on administrative leave, and we're looking into that for potential discipline.
Do you know? I actually did not realize that piece, at least in that detail. So was this not being disclosed, tracked in multiple ways? Then this nursing homes lawsuit, you say it was not reported to the Auditor General. It was not brought up. It sounds like you had meetings about pending litigation, and it wasn't mentioned, and then of course it was not appealed.
As a former attorney, I meet regularly about significant legal matters that the agency is dealing with, and this isn't something that came up. I wasn't briefed about it. Other members of the EOHHS leadership team weren't briefed about it. The Auditor General wasn't. There were some people in the state who were aware of this. This is ultimately a case about budget language and a statutory interpretation of a 2% cut that the nursing homes received back in the fiscal year 2016 budget. So there were people who were aware that had been challenged, but I joined.
I'm sorry, I want to stop you there. So outside of Health and Human Services, there were people who were aware that it had been challenged?
We actually learned about it the day that the appeal deadline passed from somebody on the House fiscal staff who had heard about it. I moved over to EOHHS to serve as secretary last year. This case began in 2016, and unfortunately, this is not something that I was being briefed on.
You're a lawyer. You're careful in your statements, but I do want to ask a little bit about the human side of this story. Take us into the room, Eric, Secretary, when you found out. Did someone come to you and say, "Close the door, Secretary, we have a problem"? I mean, how did you? I can only imagine the reaction you must have had.
I was very upset to hear this, and you know the time of the year we're in. We're in the final stages of the legislative session, where the House is currently in the process of putting together a budget for the coming fiscal year, and to get a decision like this when the appeal time is out, right when we're trying to negotiate the final budget, it was awful timing to hear that. I was deeply disappointed.
Did you speak with Mr. Haitian directly?
No, I did not speak with Mr. Hajian directly.
Part of the fallout on this revealed that he had failed to get proper legal certification, or CLEs. You brought that up, ultimately resulting in his name being tossed from the state's master list. He got back onto the master list eventually, but then we discovered another attorney on your staff was also removed from that master list. I guess my question is, what is going on in your legal office right now?
Well, this is something that we're looking at not just throughout all of EOHHS, but across all of state government. The governor has directed her team to require that every single attorney who does work for state government will certify annually that they're a member in good standing of the Rhode Island Bar. And she's also announcing further reforms to other professions that require some sort of license. When you come on board with the state, you'll be required to certify that you will keep up with licensure requirements. And they're also updating the personnel policies to be crystal clear that if you fail to keep up with professional licensing requirements, then you will be subject to disciplinary action, including the potential for termination.
You know, I want to zoom out a little bit on this. Your office, the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, was actually created 14 years ago by Governor Kachiri, and his argument at the time was we need to bring together a bunch of these big agencies, Department of Health, Department of Human Services, a couple others, that oversee the safety net so they can be streamlined and overseen and kind of coordinated. Now, between UHIP and this lawsuit failure, some candidates are saying maybe we have to reverse that and go back to independent reporting to the governor. As the secretary, do you think this structure works, or is it just too sprawling for one person to oversee?
There are many issues that families face, challenges families face, that communities face, that require that we think outside of individual state government silos. For example, as we're confronting the addiction and overdose crisis, one agency alone can't solve that problem. If we're trying to prevent child maltreatment, DCYF has an important role to play, but we need to address the systemic family issues that are ultimately the cause of abuse and neglect. So there are many issues that are important to us that require a coordinating effort across all of the different agencies to provide the most meaningful response to improve Rhode Islanders' lives. I think the best example of interagency collaboration over the course of this administration has been around the addiction and overdose crisis. Governor Raimondo made this a top priority from the moment that she became governor, creating a task force that included not just representatives across government agencies, but also from the provider community, from the private sector, people with academic experience in this area. And they put together a focused strategic plan that required efforts across a number of different domains: prevention, treatment, rescue, recovery. And just a couple months ago, we were able to announce that we were one of the few states that experienced a year-over-year reduction in overdose deaths. Not many states have experienced that. There are still far too many. We're losing approximately one life every day due to the overdose crisis.
Bureaucratically, you don't necessarily need the EOHHS structure. As you said there, a task force was created. So theoretically, you could do that without the EOHHS superstructure over it.
There are so many different examples of cases where you need multiple agencies to take action. I'll give you another example.
Briefly, please.
We wanted to create a crisis stabilization unit because we saw a gap in our behavioral health services. A provider wanted to set it up. They needed to go to the Department of Health that licenses the facility. They needed to go to BHDDH that certifies behavioral health services, and they needed Medicaid to create a rate. That required convening everybody, pulling them together. The provider said it was taking too long going individually to everybody. There are countless examples where we're able to more effectively provide services to Rhode Islanders because of this structure.
And I'd like to zoom back in, if I could. Greg Hajian got his first state legal job through then Speaker of the House William Murphy. Television footage showed a top lieutenant of current Speaker Mattiello, a man named Frank Montanaro, who we've done considerable reporting on, visiting Hajian after he resigned. Do you know if the Speaker's office or anyone connected to the Speaker ever advocated on behalf of Mr. Hajian?
Well, I can only tell you what happened during my tenure as secretary and what happened when the incident that we've discussed this week came to light. We took appropriate disciplinary action, and he's no longer a state government employee.
Do you know if anyone from the Speaker's office or connected to the Speaker ever advocated on behalf of Mr. Hajian?
I can only speak for myself. I've never had a conversation with the Speaker or his staff about any disciplinary matters.
You sent a letter to the Attorney General and the state's Chief Disciplinary Counsel. What are you looking for? What are you asking for in this case, from them specifically?
The issue that we identified in the letter is that Mr. Haitian was engaging in the unauthorized practice of law because he was no longer in good standing. That's what the referral was for. When there's misconduct like this, it's important that there's accountability in state government. I think the public recognizes that people make mistakes, and that in large organizations you will have personnel issues, but I think they expect accountability too. And this was there was a serious breach of public trust here and really poor performance, and we thought that was an appropriate action to take.
I want to ask you, you alluded to the opioid crisis. We had this morning the stunning news that Anthony Bourdain, the famous chef, had committed suicide, apparently, according to reports, and Kate Spade, the famous designer, earlier in the week, too. How big a challenge is mental health in the agencies you oversee? And there might be people watching who have themselves or a family member who have, where would you direct, as the health secretary, someone who either themselves is struggling or has a family member they're worried about?
I'm glad you asked about that. That's a really big issue. And just this morning, the New York Times had an article that showed that suicides are up 25% from 1999 to 2016. Rhode Island's increase was above the national average.
Really?
In 2016, there are twice the number of suicides as there are homicides. So this is a really major challenge. I think a lot of the attention in the last several years has been around the opioid crisis, but there are many other behavioral health challenges, and that's why this has been a big priority for the administration. Just last month, May was Mental Health Month across the country. The governor issued an executive order and ordered her team to put together a strategic plan to address the gaps in accessibility to mental health coverage. She's also supporting legislation that ensures mental health parity, so that mental health treatment is equally available as physical health. Historically, there have been barriers to treatment, and we're going to systematically diagnose where those gaps are and obstacles are, and we're going to knock them down. Everybody that needs help should have access to help. And one of the big challenges is that a lot of people don't know how to seek help, or they're unwilling to. And so the message that I'd like for your viewers to hear is that they should call 942-STOP. If you're experiencing a problem with mental health or with substance abuse, or if you have a friend or a family member who is, 942-STOP.
There are resources available. Who answers that phone?
It's staffed 24/7, and they do the intake to hear what the issue is from the caller, and they help direct that person to services that are available in the community. We've done a lot to expand access to services. The biggest challenge right now is just reaching the people who need it. So 942-STOP.
I wanted to ask you too, I did allude to the UHIP computer system situation that has gone on for a while now. We only have maybe a minute left or so. Can you just give us a status report? How is UHIP going now, a year and a half into the system?
So as you know, the governor assigned me to do a 30-day assessment last year, which I issued February 15th of 2017. We've made significant progress since then. My biggest priority was ensuring that people got access to benefits. We had a backlog of 15,000 at its peak, and now we have pending applications of about 5,000, roughly 2,000 to 3,000 are overdue. So that's on par with the way things were before the UHIP system went live. We have more challenges. We're going to continue to hold Deloitte accountable, but we're clearly moving in the right direction. More broadly, I think it's important to step back and look at what's at stake. Ultimately, we're providing access to health and human services. We have big threats at the federal level to the Affordable Care Act and the significant gains we've made in expanding access to health insurance. The Farm Bill would slash spending for SNAP, which helps fight hunger in our communities. Those are big threats that deserve as much attention as the UHIP mess.
Health and Human Services Secretary Eric Beane, thank you very much for joining us on the program. When we come back, fixing Rhode Island schools comes with a big price tag. We bring in General Treasurer Seth Magaziner. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest for the second half of the program is Treasurer Seth Magaziner. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, let's talk about school bonds. You're making the case to lawmakers and to voters to approve a $250 million bond to repair the state's crumbling schools. I got to tell you, it seems like an easy sell. Are you really facing any headwind on this request?
Well, I hope not, because we got to do it. We have to do it. You know, my focus as treasurer has always been on making investments to help the Rhode Island economy. Fixing Rhode Island schools are very much in that vein, is a project that's very much in that vein. Not only does every child in Rhode Island deserve to go to a school that is safe and warm and dry, but we also have to have facilities that will set those kids up to succeed in the 21st century workforce. That means adequate science labs. It means STEM and career tech facilities. And so we've got to do it. We've got to fix these schools. Our kids deserve it, and it's also the right thing to do for our long-term economic trajectory. And in the short term, we'll put a lot of people to work in the process actually fixing these buildings. So I'm optimistic, but I'm going to keep pushing for it because we got to get it done.
Speaker Mattiello told me over the weekend he does support the $250 million number. We hadn't been sure where he'd come down on that. That's obviously very important for you in the House. But he is still expressing at least some reservations about the scale of the borrowing here, because we do a $250 million bond this fall, and then it's envisioned maybe like a half decade or so from now we do another one because there's so much need. You know, what do you say to the Speaker's concerns about the state's debt levels and what this amount of borrowing means?
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased that the Speaker has been so supportive of our proposal this year. All of the conversations I've had with him, the most recent one yesterday afternoon, have been very constructive. And what I would say to anyone who's concerned about the bonding is this. Over the next decade, Rhode Island is going to be paying off about $1.4 billion of old bonds. That's old debt that's rolling off of our books.
For like all sorts of other stuff over the years.
Yeah, bonds that were issued 20 years ago. And it's just like, you know, when a homeowner finally finishes paying off that mortgage. That gives us the capacity to make some new investments. So our feeling is that with $1.4 billion of old bonds rolling off the books, that certainly makes this year's $250 for schools affordable, and it also gives us the opportunity to consider additional investments for fixing schools in the future, while at the same time reducing our overall level of indebtedness and giving us the capacity to bond for some other things, as we do from time to time. So it's absolutely affordable, and it's affordable largely because we have old bonds that are rolling off the books.
So you allude there to another concern I've heard, which is there seems to be basically no argument that schools need repairs, but that putting this much into the school repairs will not allow the state to borrow for other needs that are going to be there, whether it's the roads or whatever. But you think there'll be still capacity for other borrowing, even with doing all this?
No, absolutely. Again, with $1.4 billion of old debt expiring, say we do $500 million for schools over 10 years. That still leaves us almost $1 billion of space for debt reduction or for other bonding or a combination of the two.
So I read an editorial that you wrote in the Journal about this issue, and you point out that Rhode Island hasn't issued any bonds for school repairs in a decade, while Massachusetts has floated, I think, 7 in that time period. Did you write?
Actually, Rhode Island hasn't done any state bonds for K through 12 schools in almost 30 years.
Okay.
Massachusetts has done it 7 out of the last 10.
So it just got me to thinking, you know, looking back at the past 5 years or so, or 10 even, the interest rates have been super low. Have we missed out?
Potentially, but you know, that's all the more reason to make this investment now, because rates are still relatively low by historical standards.
But they're going up. Is that keeping you up at night?
Well, I mean, it argues for making this investment now and not waiting to put it in front of voters 2 years or 4 years or 6 years from now. Because you're right. I mean, I think it's more likely that in the coming years interest rates are going to rise than stay where they are or come down, which argues again for moving quickly.
I have a technical question for you. If let's say the voters in November say, yep, $250 million, and let's say they reelect you as well and you're still the treasurer. At that point, you can't go the next day and borrow the money. How quickly is the $250? Are you going to do like 50 and then 50 and then 50? Or, you know, how quickly will this be out in the streets?
Yeah, and actually the legislation says that no more than 100 can be issued in any 1 year. We want to space this out over a few years. That's part of how we guarantee that multiple communities all over the state will benefit from this bonding, because not every city or town is ready to break ground on a project next year. So the vision is to spread this $250 million out over a few years, in part because it helps us with the affordability, but also because it will help guarantee that the benefits are spread statewide.
Do you think you could do $100 million in 2019, calendar 19?
It's possible.
And just want to wrap up this topic here, but how many schools would be repaired for $250 million? I mean, what do we talk about the impact of that money?
So we've got a huge statewide problem, as you know, 306 public school buildings in Rhode Island. Every single school district has at least one building with a significant health or safety deficiency. That's another thing that we want to make clear to people. There is need in every city and town in Rhode Island. So the answer to how many buildings will ultimately be fixed depends on what the communities decide to do. The cities and towns are still going to have to step up and pay a share of these costs for repairing the schools, because we think it's important for cities and towns to have skin in the game, and also the decision making for which buildings to renovate, which buildings to replace should be local decisions. But what we're trying to do is make it easier for the cities and towns to do those projects and to do them faster.
All right, let's switch topics. There's a new POSOX bill out, came public a little over a week ago. It changes the way the stadium would be financed. Without getting too in the weeds, basically Pawtucket would be using one of its agencies to do the borrowing, and they'd have a pledge of state tax revenue, but the speaker says there'd be no backstop from the city or the state, that you can have regular tax revenue if the stadium revenue falls short. Have you analyzed it? What's your take on this plan?
Yes, so we have been analyzing it, and the take is this. I think that the framework that the speaker has put out there is a very interesting one. It does appear to succeed in shifting risk away from the taxpayers, both state and city. The trade-off to that is that the cost of the bonds are a little more expensive, But yes, to answer your question, under this version, there is no backstop by the state or by the city. The risk is shifted. I've been supportive, as you know, of efforts to try to keep the POSOX in Rhode Island. I think it is good for economic development in a part of the state that desperately needs it. It's also good for quality of life. You know, these are the kinds of amenities that we should be promoting as a state. What I like about AAA baseball in particular is that it's affordable family entertainment for families who don't have a lot of money to spend. You know, these days you go to the Red Sox or the Patriots, you have to mortgage your house.
Yes. Take out a $250 million bond.
Bottom line, I mean, I'm pleased to see this conversation progressing. I'm pleased that the speaker has come out with a framework that allows that conversation to continue, and I'm hopeful that we are able to keep the POSOX in Rhode Island on terms that are responsible and affordable for the taxpayers.
Providence Water Supply Board, there's a lot of talk of getting money from Providence Water Supply to put it into the failing city pension fund. What do you think of it?
Yeah, so I've said before, I think on this show, that the municipal pension systems, and particularly the Providence pension system, are the biggest financial challenge in the state of Rhode Island. So this is something that we need to be focusing on, and that I'm glad is in the conversation. The advice that I have given to the mayor and to the city council leadership is there's no one thing that's going to be big enough to fix the problem, because the problem is so big. So they should be exploring multiple options. When it comes to the Water Supply Board in particular, the first thing that I would look at if I were them is it even the city's to sell?
Angel Tavares said that on this show a few weeks ago. He doesn't think it is.
There's a real question, I think, legally around does the infrastructure belong to the city or does it belong to the ratepayers? Because it's been a long time since the city has invested city funds into maintaining the infrastructure. So if I were the mayor or the council, I would start by looking at that first, because if the answer is no, then all the rest becomes irrelevant, right? But bottom line, look at it. Look at that. Look at a range of different options for addressing the Providence pension shortfall, because it is a big problem and it's something that we're going to have to deal with as a city and as a state.
Democratic gubernatorial candidate Matt Brown said this week he wants to basically undo a lot of the 2011 pension reform law. He argues that by moving the state's pension assets into index funds, the savings from lower fees and better investment returns will generate enough to cover the entire cost of restoring annual COLAs for the retirees. Does that math work?
Well, I wish it was that simple, but no. Every Rhode Islander deserves retirement security, especially those Rhode Islanders who have spent their lives serving the state, serving as teachers, as first responders, as state employees. And the good news is the system is getting healthier. You know, we made over $1 billion of investment gains for the pension system last year. Since I launched the Back to Basics investment strategy, we've had performance tick up. So the system is getting healthier. I haven't seen the specifics of any plan from Matt Brown. What I do know is if we were to reverse the COLA changes from the 2011 reform, it would increase the unfunded liability to the pension by about $2 billion. It's a big number. So I hesitate to comment any further on it because I haven't seen the specifics of a plan. But the good news again is, you know, the investment strategy that I've put into place, where we have dramatically reduced the role of hedge funds in the portfolio, we have shifted those funds to more traditional investments, is working. We made a lot of money for the pension system last year, and we're on a path to get it back to health.
Treasurer, we have about 25 seconds left. Congratulations on your nuptials
you.
next month. Did you float a bond to pay for it? Or
well, at the rate we're going, no. But thank you. We're very excited.
Well, we're excited for you too. I wanted to say that because probably won't have you in the show and as a single man again. So good luck next month.
Your bachelor party on Newsmakers.
That's it. Terrific. It's a wild one. Yeah. Treasurer Magaziner, thanks for joining us. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.